It was February 2019 when I decided to go winter camping alone for a weekend in northern Montana. I had been working non-stop for months and needed a break from everything. I didn't want to go to some crowded resort or rent a cabin filled with people. I just wanted silence, snow, and space to think. I packed up my gear, a two-person tent, a sleeping bag rated for negative temperatures, a small camping stove, a flashlight, some canned food, and my old camera. I'd been camping plenty of times before, but never alone in winter. That was the point, though. I wanted something different. The drive took almost 8 hours. The road was mostly empty, and the farther north I went, the quieter everything became. Trees were coated in snow like frozen skeletons, and the sunlight looked thin and pale. I reached the trailhead around 4 p.m. and parked near an old ranger station that looked abandoned. From there, I planned to hike about 2 miles to a small frozen lake called Danner Lake. I'd seen pictures online, surrounded by pine trees, quiet, completely untouched in winter. The hike was harder than I expected. The snow was knee-deep in places, and every few steps I'd sink into it. My backpack felt heavier with every minute. My breath came out in white clouds that hung in the air before fading. There were no sounds except for my boots crunching and the wind sliding through the trees. After an hour or so, I reached the lake. It was smaller than I imagined, just a flat sheet of ice with patches of snow and a few bare trees near the edges. I set up my tent near a slope where the ground was slightly higher, so if the snow melted a little, water wouldn't flow underneath. By the time I finished setting up, the sun was almost gone. The sky turned deep blue, then gray, then black. The cold became sharper, like tiny needles pressing against my face. I cooked a can of soup on my stove, ate it quickly, and crawled into my sleeping bag. My breath fogged up the inside of the tent, and the fabric made small crackling noises whenever I moved. I fell asleep listening to the sound of the wind. At some point during the night, I woke up. My body felt stiff, and the air inside the tent was freezing. I checked my watch, 3:17 a.m. I tried to roll over and go back to sleep, but I heard something outside. It was faint, like the sound of snow being crushed under weight. I stayed still and listened. Came again, slow and uneven. A crunch, then a pause. Another crunch. I told myself it was probably an animal, maybe a deer or a fox, but something about the rhythm didn't fit. It sounded too heavy. I held my breath and waited, staring at the tent wall. The sound got closer. Then it stopped. For a long minute, there was nothing. No wind, no sound, just silence. My body was tense, every muscle locked. I thought about unzipping the tent and shining my flashlight outside, but I couldn't move. I just stayed there, listening. After a while, I heard the sound again, but this time it was farther away. Then it faded completely. In the morning, I stepped outside. The air felt sharp and dry. My boots sank into fresh snow that had fallen overnight. Around my tent were a few deep footprints, leading from the tree line toward the lake. They weren't mine. They were larger, spaced farther apart, and there was only one set. I followed them for a few steps, but they disappeared onto the frozen lake, covered slightly by blown snow. I didn't go any further. I just stood there, staring at the ice. I told myself it was probably a hiker or hunter passing through, but something about it bothered me. The nearest town was miles away, and the trailhead was empty when I arrived. I hadn't seen a single car or person. Still, I tried to ignore it. I made breakfast, packed my camera, and decided to take some photos around the lake. The air was quiet, almost too quiet. Even the wind seemed hesitant. By midday, the temperature dropped again, and gray clouds started moving in. I decided not to stay another night. I packed up and started the hike back. The snow had gotten thicker, and my path from yesterday was mostly gone. It was harder to move. After about half an hour, I stopped to rest near a fallen tree. I turned around to check my trail, just my footprints stretching behind me in a straight line. But as I kept looking, I noticed something that made my stomach tighten. There was another set of footprints in the snow. They weren't there when I'd started walking. They followed the same path as mine, but they weren't mine. They were slightly offset, like someone had been walking behind me just a few minutes later. I stared at them for a long time. They led back toward the lake. My hands started shaking a little, and the cold suddenly felt sharper. I tried to think logically. Maybe I'd crossed my own trail somehow or turned without noticing. But that didn't make sense. The spacing was different. They were clearly made by someone else. I picked up my pace. My heart was racing. Every sound, a branch cracking, snow falling from a tree, made me look over my shoulder. The trail ahead felt endless. The forest seemed darker now, the trees closer together. I kept moving, barely stopping for breath. When I finally reached the ranger station, the relief I felt was overwhelming. My car was exactly where I left it. I threw my backpack inside, sat down, and just stared at the steering wheel for a while. My hands were trembling so badly I could hardly put the keys in. As I pulled out, I looked at the snow-covered trail leading back into the woods. It was empty, completely still. It took almost 9 hours to get home because of the weather. I didn't stop once. When I finally got back to my apartment, I left all my gear in the corner and went straight to the shower. The water was hot, but I still couldn't shake the cold. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about those footprints, how they had appeared out of nowhere, how they stopped right where I had stopped. A few days later, I developed the photos from my camera. Most were normal: trees, the lake, my tent. But one made me stop. It was a shot of the lake, taken sometime in the morning before I packed up. In the bottom right corner, near the edge of the frame, was something faint. First, I thought it was a tree trunk, but when I looked closer, it looked more like a person standing just at the edge of the woods. Too far to see clearly, but the shape was there, still and facing my direction. I sat there for a long time, just staring at it. I tried to convince myself it was a trick of the light or maybe a shadow, but deep down, I knew I hadn't imagined those footsteps. Someone had been out there that night, watching quietly in the dark while I slept in my tent. That was the last time I ever went camping alone. It was the winter of 2019, somewhere deep in northern Montana, where the snow stacked in heavy, uneven layers and the trees stood motionless, like tall shadows frozen mid-step. I had gone there for a weekend camping trip, mostly to clear my head. I was 27 back then, tired of my job, tired of screens, tired of people. I packed up my tent, a small propane heater, some canned food, and drove out alone in my old Ford until the asphalt ended and the forest took over. It was supposed to be peaceful, just a quiet weekend away. The weather app said it would be cold but manageable, around -5 degrees Celsius, maybe dropping to -10 degrees Celsius overnight. I could handle that. I grew up in places colder than this, but weather changes fast in the mountains, and I didn't realize how quickly calm could turn into danger until I was too far in to turn back. I set up camp near a frozen lake, about a 45-minute hike from where I parked the truck. The snow there was untouched except for animal tracks, some rabbit prints, a few deer trails leading into the thicker woods. I set up my small 2-person tent facing the lake. The air was thin and clean, and every breath made steam curl out from my mouth. I gathered wood, started a small fire, cooked a can of beans, and thought about how perfect it all felt. No traffic noise, no phone buzzing, no one talking. Just the sound of wind brushing through pine branches and the occasional crack from the ice on the lake. When the sun went down, everything turned blue. The temperature dropped fast. I put on 2 pairs of socks and an extra layer under my jacket before crawling into my sleeping bag. I had one of those thick thermal ones rated for extreme cold, but the ground was still like stone under me. I could feel the cold seeping up slowly, the kind that doesn't bite at first but crawls deep into your bones over time. At around midnight, I woke up to the sound of something distant. It wasn't an animal sound exactly. It was like a faint crunching, slow and spaced apart, as if someone was walking carefully on snow. I didn't move at first. I told myself it was probably just a deer, maybe a fox. But the sound stopped for a few minutes, then started again, closer this time. My tent was thin enough that I could see faint shadows when the moonlight hit the snow outside. I held my breath, watching, waiting for movement. Nothing happened for a while, and eventually I convinced myself it was nothing. Just my nerves and the wind shifting branches. When I woke again, it was almost dawn. My tent zipper was partly open, just a few inches, but I knew I had closed it fully the night before. There were no footprints around my camp that I could see, but the snow had started falling lightly overnight, covering anything that might have been there. Still, something about it felt off. I decided to move my camp deeper into the woods that day, away from the open lake. I told myself it would help block the wind better, but in truth, I just didn't like how exposed it felt anymore. The forest was dense and quiet, almost unnaturally so. The kind of silence that feels thick, like the world itself is holding its breath. I found a spot between two slopes where the wind couldn't reach much. I set up again, built another small fire, and melted snow for water. The sky stayed gray all afternoon. Around 5 p.m., it started snowing heavier, thick flakes that fell slow but steady. I ate early and tried to warm up before bed. That night, the noises came back. This time, it wasn't slow crunching. It was sudden, scattered movements, like something pacing around but keeping its distance. I turned off my lantern and just lay still. The sound would stop completely for a minute, then pick up again from a different side of the tent. I gripped my knife inside my sleeping bag, more for comfort than anything else. I didn't sleep at all. By morning, I decided I'd had enough. The snow was deeper now, maybe a foot thick, and my firewood was running low. I packed my things and started the long hike back toward the truck. But something had changed. The trail I used yesterday was gone, completely buried under new snow. I couldn't see my own tracks. Everything looked the same. Every direction was just trees, white ground, and gray sky. I tried to use my compass, but the magnetic needle kept twitching erratically. Maybe it was the cold messing with it, or maybe it was something in the rocks nearby, but it wasn't pointing steady. I walked for hours. My hands went numb even inside my gloves. I stopped feeling my toes after the first hour. The snow kept falling, and the light started fading earlier than I expected. Around 3 p.m., it was already getting dim. I hadn't seen the lake or the road, and panic started to creep in. I forced myself to stay calm, checked my GPS, and realized the battery had died. I hadn't charged it since yesterday. That sinking feeling in my stomach hit me hard. I was lost. By the time it was completely dark again, I couldn't move any further. I set up the tent in a small clearing, using what little energy I had left. My breath was shallow, my fingertips stiff. I lit the small propane heater and sat in front of it, watching the flame flicker while the tent walls shook slightly from the wind. I thought about how I hadn't told anyone exactly where I was going. Just somewhere in Montana. Nobody knew my location. Sometime after midnight, I must have drifted off. When I woke up, the heater had run out, and the inside of the tent was coated in a thin layer of frost. My water bottle was frozen solid. My head was pounding from dehydration, and when I tried to move, my joints felt locked. I forced myself up, packed what I could, and started walking again. The wind had cleared the snow in certain places, and I noticed something strange. Faint footprints. They weren't mine. They were too large, spaced out differently. Maybe someone else had been camping nearby, I thought. I followed them for a while, desperate for any sign of another person. After nearly an hour, the prince stopped near a patch of flattened snow. There were torn plastic wrappers, the corner of a sleeping bag half buried, and what looked like an old campfire pit. Whoever had been there left in a hurry. The sight of it made my stomach twist. I looked around for more tracks but saw none. It was like whoever had been there vanished into the trees. By late afternoon, I stumbled upon a small forest road, half covered in snow. My legs were shaking so badly I could barely stand. I followed it downhill for almost 2 hours before I finally saw my truck, half buried but still there. When I got inside, my hands were shaking too much to turn the key at first. The heater blasted warm air as the engine coughed to life. I sat there for a long time, just staring at the trees outside. A week later, after I got home, I looked up reports of missing hikers in that area. There was one case from 2017, 2 men who had gone winter camping near the same lake and never came back. The rescue team found their camp, half buried, about a mile from where I had set mine up. The article said they had likely gotten disoriented in a snowstorm and froze to death trying to find their way back. I kept thinking about those footprints I followed. Maybe they were old, frozen and preserved under layers of snow. Or maybe they were from one of them leading nowhere. I'll never know. But every winter since then, when the wind howls outside my window, I still think about that tent zipper, half open in the middle of the night, and how quiet those woods really were. It was February 2018, somewhere deep in the northern forests of Montana. I was 29 back then, and I'd planned a solo winter camping trip, something I'd been wanting to do for years but never got around to. I'd grown up camping with my dad every summer, but this was different. It was the middle of winter, the kind of cold that makes the air sting your face the moment you breathe in. I wanted quiet, isolation, no phone service, no noise, just me, a tent, and the frozen woods. I drove for hours down a narrow snow-covered road that wound through the trees until the pavement ended. From there, I parked my truck near a frozen lake and carried my gear deeper into the woods, following an old trail covered in snow. The forest was heavy with silence, the kind of silence that makes you aware of your own heartbeat. The only sound was the crunch of my boots and the occasional cracking of ice under my steps. It was peaceful, but it had that sharp edge of emptiness that felt almost too quiet, like the world was holding its breath. I picked a spot by a clearing near a stream that was still running under a thin layer of ice. I set up my tent, built a small fire, and started melting snow for water. It was slow, methodical work, exactly what I wanted. The cold bit through my gloves, and every breath turned into a small cloud in front of me. The air smelled clean, but it had that faint metallic scent that winter always brings. As the light started to fade, the forest changed. The brightness of the snow turned blue, then gray, and then everything just became a black wall of trees. I sat near the fire, eating a can of beans and some jerky, listening to the occasional cracking of branches far away. It was probably just the trees shifting from the cold, I told myself. But every time I heard something move, it felt closer. Later that night, the temperature dropped fast. The cold was so sharp that even with layers on, it crept through everything. I crawled into my sleeping bag, zipped it up tight, and tried to sleep, but I kept waking up. Around midnight, I heard something faint, like snow crunching slowly outside my tent. I told myself it was an animal, maybe a deer. I stayed still, eyes open, listening. The sound stopped, then started again, closer this time. Then silence, just wind. I laid there for what felt like hours, waiting for the sound to come back, but it didn't. Eventually, I fell asleep again. When I woke up, the inside of the tent was covered in frost. My breath had frozen against the fabric. I unzipped the door and stepped out into the morning light. Everything was white and still. My fire pit was buried under a light layer of new snow. But something looked off. The snow around the tent was disturbed, not in the pattern of wind, but more like tracks. They weren't animal tracks either. They looked like footprints, but uneven, dragging in spots like someone had walked through with one shoe off or limping. I stared at them for a long time, trying to make sense of it. They went past my tent and disappeared into the trees. I felt that slow, crawling unease build in my chest. I tried to reason it out, maybe hunters, maybe someone else camping nearby. But the trail I took in hadn't shown any other vehicles, no tire marks but mine. I didn't see anyone the entire way in. I tried to shake it off, rebuilt the fire, made coffee, and forced myself to act normal. Still, I kept glancing at the tree line every few minutes. By midday, I decided to hike a bit around the lake and take some photos. The snow was deep and heavy, and it made everything move slower. The wind had picked up, and it was blowing fine powder off the trees, making it hard to see far ahead. About half a mile from camp, I noticed something half buried under the snow. A torn piece of fabric, dark red, frozen stiff. It looked like part of a jacket sleeve. I pulled it out, and it was old, faded, with what looked like a rip across it. I thought maybe someone had lost it long ago, but it didn't feel weathered enough for that. Something about that piece of fabric made me feel sick. The cold didn't even feel cold anymore. It was just that deep kind of dread that sits heavy in your stomach. I turned back toward camp, moving faster now. I could see my own trail from earlier, but halfway back, I noticed there were more footprints in the snow beside mine. Fresh ones. They followed my path from the tent, up to where I found the sleeve. That night, I couldn't relax. I didn't even bother to make a fire. I just sat inside the tent with my flashlight on, trying to listen through the wind. Every sound made me flinch. The snapping of branches, the groaning of ice on the stream. Around 2 a.m., I heard it again. Slow, steady crunching in the snow, moving around the camp. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely unzip the tent window flap. I peeked through the small opening, but the light from the moon was faint through the clouds. Still, I could see a faint shape. A person, I think, standing near the trees, not moving, just standing. I froze. My body felt locked in place. I stared until my eyes burned, and when I blinked, the shape was gone. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. As soon as the sky started to lighten, I packed everything fast. My hands were numb, and I barely cared about folding anything properly. I just needed to leave. When I stepped out of the tent, I saw the prints again, this time closer, circling around the tent. The footprints were deep, fresh. Someone had been walking around while I was inside. I followed them with my eyes and saw they led back toward the trees, the same direction I saw the shape. I didn't follow them. I just grabbed my pack and started hiking fast back toward where my truck was. The air felt heavier, and every sound made me turn around. The woods didn't look the same as when I came in. Everything felt tighter, closer, like the trees had moved in during the night. When I finally reached the truck, I slammed the door, locked it, and just sat there breathing, waiting for my hands to stop shaking. I started the engine, but before driving off, I noticed something on the side mirror. A smudge, like a handprint, faint but visible, pressed into the thin layer of frost. I didn't look around after that. I drove straight out of those woods without stopping. I didn't look in the mirrors, didn't check the back seat. Nothing. I just drove until I hit the highway, where I finally felt like I could breathe again. I never went back to that spot, and I never tried winter camping again. A week later, out of curiosity, I checked some local news online. There was a small article about a man who'd gone missing near that area 2 years earlier. They never found him, just his torn jacket near a frozen stream. The picture of the jacket looked exactly like the sleeve I found in the snow. That was the last time I ever camped alone. It was early January of 2019 when I decided to go winter camping alone for the first time. I had always liked the quietness of the woods in winter. The air felt heavier, the trees looked older, and everything seemed slower. I drove out to a small area in northern Montana, near the edge of a frozen lake I had once camped beside in the summer. Back then, the place was full of families, laughter, and campfires. But that winter, it was just me, my tent, and an endless stretch of white silence. The sky was gray from the start, not stormy, just heavy with clouds that didn't move. I parked my truck near a narrow dirt path that led into the forest, the kind that hadn't seen much use since the snow started. I carried my gear, tent, sleeping bag, food, stove in 2 trips. The snow came up to my knees in some places, making every step slow. I finally found a spot between 2 large pine trees where the wind didn't hit too hard. I set up my tent there, laid out my sleeping bag, and started collecting wood for a small fire. By the time the fire was going, my gloves were soaked, and the skin on my fingers felt stiff. The sound of the fire cracking was the only thing that reminded me I wasn't completely alone. There was no wind that evening, no animal sounds either, just the faint creak of trees shifting under the cold. I ate a small dinner, a can of chili heated over the flame, and drank from my thermos. The temperature dropped fast once the light faded. Around 8 p.m., it was already pitch black, the kind of black where even the snow seemed to disappear. I sat by the fire, staring into it, trying not to think about how far I was from anyone. My phone had no signal. The closest sign of a town was over 20 miles away. I told myself I'd be fine. I had enough supplies and I'd camped plenty of times before. But that night, the quiet didn't feel peaceful. It felt like something was listening. At first, I thought I was just imagining it. That sense that something was moving out there beyond the trees. I kept hearing faint crunching sounds, the kind that snow makes when something heavy steps on it. I figured maybe it was a deer or a fox, but the sounds didn't move like an animal. They stopped when I moved, started again when I sat still. I tried shining my flashlight into the woods, but the beam only reached a few feet before the darkness swallowed it. Nothing, just trees. I told myself to relax and went inside the tent. I zipped it up tight, crawled into my sleeping bag, and tried to sleep. The wind had started up again, brushing against the fabric of the tent, and every sound seemed sharper in the cold. I must have dozed off for a while, but then something woke me up. It was the sound of snow crunching again. Slow, careful steps, close this time, maybe 10 feet away. I held my breath and listened. The steps stopped. Then, a soft thud, like someone brushing against my tent. My heart started pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. I didn't move. I waited. After a minute, there was nothing, just the faint whistle of wind again. I told myself it had to be snow falling from a branch or maybe a small animal brushing past. Still, I couldn't fall back asleep. I stayed there, eyes open in the dark, until morning light finally came through the thin fabric. When I stepped outside, everything looked untouched. No prints near my tent, no sign of movement. The snow looked perfectly smooth. I felt stupid for how scared I'd been. I shook it off, made coffee, and walked toward the edge of the woods to stretch my legs. That's when I saw them. Not near my tent, but maybe 50 yards out. Deep footprints leading from the treeline toward the lake. They weren't animal tracks. They were boot prints. The strange thing was they didn't lead to the camp. They led around it, a big circle around where I'd pitched my tent, and then disappeared back into the trees. Whoever it was had been walking around me while I slept. I felt my stomach twist. My first thought was that maybe another camper had wandered close, but there were no other vehicles on the access road. I checked. The snow by my truck was untouched, no new tire marks. Whoever it was must have been on foot. The day felt different after that. Every sound made me jump. I tried to focus on small things, gathering more wood, boiling water, but my hands kept shaking. Around noon, I started thinking about packing up early, but I didn't want to admit to myself that I was scared. I told myself I'd stay one more night. That evening, I made sure the fire was strong. I set my flashlight next to me, my knife within reach. The air was even colder than before, and the silence felt heavier. The kind that presses on your ears until you start to imagine sounds that aren't really there. Around midnight, I heard it again. The same slow, crunching sound of snow. My body froze. I turned off my small lantern, and the darkness swallowed me whole. The sound was closer this time, not circling, approaching. I could hear the snow compressing under each step. I wanted to look, but I couldn't move. I just sat there, my breath shallow, my hand tight around the knife handle. Then the sound stopped. Nothing, just the fire crackling low. I sat there for what felt like hours, waiting for it to start again. Didn't. When the sun came up, I stepped out of the tent, heart still pounding. The first thing I saw was another set of footprints, fresh ones, leading straight up to where my tent was. They stopped right at the door. Whoever it was had been standing there just outside while I was inside. That was it for me. I packed everything in less than 10 minutes. My fingers were numb, my face raw from the cold, but I didn't care. I threw everything in the back of the truck and left. As I drove back down the narrow road, I looked once in the mirror. The campsite was already disappearing behind a curtain of snow falling again. When I reached town later that day, I stopped at a gas station and finally looked at my phone. The battery was low, but it picked up a weak signal. I searched for missing people near Flat Pine Lake. The first result showed a headline from 2 weeks earlier. A local man missing after going on a solo winter hike in the same area. They never found him. I didn't go back to the woods after that. I still go camping sometimes, but never alone and never in winter. The sound of snow crunching under boots still makes my chest tighten. Because out there, when the night is quiet enough, you realize how easy it is for someone to stand just a few feet away from you, and you'd never even know it. It was late January 2017. I was 26 and decided to go winter camping alone for a weekend in northern Montana. I had done summer camping plenty of times before, but I'd never done it in the snow. I wanted to see what it felt like, to be completely cut off in total silence, surrounded by white forests. I thought it would be peaceful. I even convinced myself that it would be something like therapy, just me and nature for a few days. The drive up took about 6 hours. By the time I reached the dirt road that led to the trailhead, my fingers were stiff even with gloves on. Snow covered everything except the narrow tire tracks left by the last vehicle that passed. I parked my truck near the entrance, packed my gear, and started walking into the woods just before sunset. I wanted to get a few miles in before dark and then set up camp by a frozen lake I'd seen on the map. The air was dead still. The sound of my boots crushing snow was the only thing I could hear. My breath came out as white clouds that hung in the air for a second before fading. The sky turned a pale purple as the sun went down behind the pines. I reached the lake right before it got completely dark. The ice reflected the sky faintly, giving the whole area a dim blue glow. I pitched my small tent near the edge of the treeline, started a small fire with the dry wood I'd packed in my sled, and melted some snow for water. That first night was colder than I expected. Even in my sleeping bag, I couldn't stop shivering. The wind picked up around midnight, shaking the tent just enough to wake me every hour. I kept hearing the soft creaks of ice expanding and cracking on the lake, which at first sounded almost like footsteps. But I told myself it was just the cold playing tricks on my ears. When I woke up the next morning, the world was completely silent again. My fire pit was buried under a thin layer of snow. I got up, stretched, and decided to hike up a nearby ridge to get a better view. From up there, I could see miles of untouched white forest. No smoke, no footprints, nothing but snow and trees. It was beautiful and lonely at the same time. Around noon, I went back to camp to make lunch. That's when I noticed something strange. My sled had shifted about a foot from where I'd left it. It was light, but it hadn't been windy enough to move it that far. I figured I must have tugged on the rope when I was unpacking earlier and didn't realize. Still, I felt uneasy. I checked my supplies. Everything was still there, just a few small animal tracks around it. Probably a fox or something looking for food. That night was worse. The temperature dropped hard, and I could feel frost building on the inside of the tent. I kept the fire going longer, burning through most of my wood supply. I finally crawled into my sleeping bag around midnight, exhausted. I must have fallen asleep fast because the next thing I remember was waking up to the faint crunch of snow outside my tent. It wasn't the sound of branches falling or the wind. It was deliberate, soft steps, slow and spaced apart. I held my breath and listened. The steps circled the tent once, maybe twice. My heart was pounding so hard it felt like it was shaking the ground. I reached for the small hatchet I kept next to my sleeping bag and stayed completely still. After a while, the sound faded. I didn't hear anything else after that, but I didn't sleep again that night. In the morning, I unzipped the tent and stepped outside. There were fresh footprints in the snow, but they weren't from an animal. They were boot prints, not mine. I looked at the direction they came from. They led out of the woods, stopped right behind my tent, circled it once, and then went back the same way. They were partially covered by new snow, but not enough to hide their shape. My throat went dry. I scanned the trees, the frozen lake, everything. I didn't see anyone. The tracks disappeared into the forest. I tried to calm myself, telling myself maybe it was a hiker who got lost, or a hunter checking if someone was camping out there. But deep down, I knew no one else would be out here in this weather. I packed up my gear as fast as I could, but halfway through, I stopped. If I left immediately and whoever it was still around, they might follow my tracks back to the road. So I decided to stay one more night, but stay alert. I rebuilt my fire and kept it going until late evening. I barely ate. Every sound made me flinch. Around 2 a.m., I heard it again. This time, the steps came faster, crunching closer through the snow. I grabbed my flashlight, ripped open the zipper, and shined the light out. Nothing, just empty trees and falling snow. But the prints were there, fresh ones, coming straight from the forest and stopping a few feet away. Whoever it was had been standing there, watching. That was enough for me. I threw everything into my pack, didn't even bother folding the tent, and started walking back toward the road. My flashlight caught the clouds of my breath as I stumbled through the dark. I kept checking behind me, convinced I'd see someone following. My tracks glowed faintly in the moonlight, and every time the wind picked up, I froze, thinking it was footsteps again. It took me almost 4 hours to reach my truck. When I finally saw it through the trees, I felt a rush of relief. But as I got closer, I noticed something wrong. The driver's side door was slightly open. I hadn't left it that way. Snow had blown onto the seat and dashboard. I stood there staring at it, afraid to move. Then I looked at the ground and saw them again, boot prints. They led from the woods straight to my truck, then circled around it just like at the tent. The same shape, same size. The snow was deeper there, so it was hard to tell exactly how old they were, but they weren't covered completely. Whoever it was had been there maybe an hour or two before I arrived. I didn't waste another second. I jumped into the truck, locked the doors, and started it up. The engine barely turned over in the cold. When it finally did, I slammed it into gear and drove until I hit the main road. I didn't look back once. I never figured out who it was. The area wasn't near any cabins or hunting grounds, and I hadn't seen another car parked when I arrived. I reported it to the local ranger station a few days later, but they didn't find anything except a few broken branches where the tracks had gone. They said it was probably another camper, but I know what I saw. Those prints were too deliberate, too quiet. That trip changed the way I feel about the woods. I still go camping, but never alone and never in the winter. There's something about the silence out there, the way it hides every sound until it's too close. The woods don't care if you're scared or lost. They just stand there, quiet and endless, watching. It was late January, and I decided to go winter camping alone in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan. I had done solo hikes before, but never during winter. The idea came from boredom more than adventure. I just wanted to disconnect for a while. I packed my tent, sleeping bag rated for sub-zero temperatures, a small propane heater, freeze-dried food, and a few essential tools. I told myself it would just be 3 nights, deep in the quiet woods covered in snow. I parked my car near a frozen logging trail, far from the nearest town, and started hiking in around noon. The air was sharp and dry, and my breath hung in front of me like smoke. The forest looked beautiful, everything covered in white, branches bending under the weight of the snow. The silence felt heavier than usual, like sound itself froze in the air. It took me about 2 hours to reach a flat area between tall pines where I decided to set up camp. The first day went smoothly. I pitched my tent, built a small fire, and melted snow for water. By the time the sky turned pink and then dark blue, I was settled in, eating a packet of instant chili and watching the fire dance in front of me. The temperature dropped quickly after sunset, below 10 degrees Fahrenheit. When I finally crawled into my sleeping bag, the cold pressed against the fabric like a living thing trying to get in. The second morning, I woke up early to a strange quiet. No wind, no creaking trees, just pure stillness. My tent had a thin layer of frost inside, and every time I breathed out, a small cloud drifted in front of my face. I stepped outside to stretch and noticed a single line of tracks leading away from my campsite. They were human boot prints, but not mine. They were fresher, too, maybe from early morning. I followed them for a few steps before stopping. They came from the woods, passed by my tent about 10 feet away, then disappeared back into the trees. Whoever made them must have been there while I slept. That thought sat heavy in my stomach. I told myself it was probably from a hunter or another camper passing by. But the nearest trail was miles away, and there were no tire tracks or snowmobile marks near the logging road where I parked. I shook it off and tried to focus on making breakfast. The day went by uneventfully after that, but I couldn't stop glancing toward the tree line. Every sound, a cracking branch or the faint rush of wind, made me turn my head. By evening, clouds had rolled in, and light snow started falling. I built my fire again and kept it going for warmth. The woods felt darker that night, the trees like walls closing in. Around midnight, I woke up to what I thought was the wind flapping my tent. Then I heard slow, heavy crunches in the snow outside. It wasn't the sound of an animal, too deliberate, too even. It stopped for a while, then started again, circling the tent. I froze, barely breathing. I wanted to unzip the flap and look, but something in me said not to. The footsteps stopped behind the tent, near my head, then silence. I waited, every nerve on edge. After a long minute, I heard soft breathing, faint but human. My chest tightened so hard it hurt. I grabbed my knife, keeping it inside my sleeping bag, and waited. After what felt like hours, the sound faded. I stayed awake until dawn, my body trembling from cold and fear. When morning came, I crawled out and looked around. The snow was freshly fallen, and the tracks were clear. Footprints again, this time circling my tent twice. They led off into the woods and disappeared downhill. I thought about packing up and leaving right then, but my car was a long hike away, and the weather looked like it was turning worse. I told myself I could handle one more night, just one more, and I'd leave early the next morning. The third day was colder. The wind picked up, and snow kept falling in thick waves that blurred everything. I barely left my tent except to gather wood. The forest didn't look beautiful anymore. It looked empty and dangerous. My firewood ran low by evening, so I forced myself to go out one more time before dark. I walked about 50 yards away and started breaking dead branches off a fallen tree. That's when I saw it, something metallic on the snow. It was a small hunting knife, half buried, with a leather handle darkened from use. I picked it up. The blade had dried mud and something else that looked faintly like old blood. The weird part was, the snow around it wasn't disturbed much, like it had been there for days, yet it hadn't been buried completely. I dropped it and went back to camp fast, heart pounding so hard it made my ears ring. That night, the wind howled through the trees, and I thought maybe I'd finally get some rest since it would drown out any sounds. But sometime after midnight, I woke to my tent zipper moving, slow, deliberate. I lunged up and shouted, but the sound caught in my throat. The zipper froze halfway. Then I heard footsteps running off into the snow. I rushed out with my flashlight, shaking, sweeping the beam across the trees. Nothing. Just a few half-formed tracks leading away before they disappeared under fresh snow. I didn't wait for morning. I threw everything into my pack, half-zipped my tent, and started hiking back toward the road in the dark. The snow came harder, and the trail was almost gone. My flashlight dimmed, and my boots slipped on icy patches. Every few minutes, I stopped and turned around, certain I was hearing something behind me. Soft crunches just far enough that I couldn't see. My lungs burned, and my fingers felt like wood. It took nearly 3 hours to reach my car. The doors were half frozen, and when I got inside, my hands were shaking so badly I dropped the keys twice before starting the engine. I didn't look in the mirror once on the drive back. I just kept my eyes on the road until I saw the lights of the nearest town. When I finally stopped at a gas station, I saw something that made my stomach drop. On the back of my car, stuck in the snow-covered bumper, was a small handprint, bare with smudges of dirt frozen into the shape. I didn't go back for my tent. I didn't even report it to the police because I had no proof of anything. Just footprints, a knife, and a feeling I'll never forget. Now, whenever someone talks about winter camping or isolation or peace and quiet in nature, I remember that sound, slow footsteps circling my tent while I lay frozen inside, waiting for the zipper to move again. It was the first week of January 2019 when I decided to go winter camping alone in northern Montana. I had taken a few solo trips before, but this time I wanted to challenge myself. Real cold, real isolation, far from everything. I packed my gear carefully. A 4-season tent, a small camping stove, freeze-dried food, a sleeping bag rated for minus 20 degrees Fahrenheit, and an emergency beacon just in case. I drove out in my old 2008 Jeep through miles of quiet snow-covered roads until I reached the trailhead near a frozen lake called Thompson Hollow. The air was completely still when I stepped out of the car. The sound of snow crunching under my boots was sharp and loud, like breaking glass. I pulled the hood of my Parkititer and started the 2-mile hike to the spot I had marked on the map. A small clearing surrounded by pine trees, not too close to the frozen water, but far enough from the trail. The temperature was around 10 degrees Fahrenheit, but the silence made it feel even colder, like the air itself had stopped moving. Setting up the tent took longer than usual. The ground was hard, and my hands kept going numb every few minutes. The metal stakes felt like ice cubes. By the time I got the tent standing, the sun was starting to dip behind the trees, and the sky had that pale orange glow that lasts only a few minutes before everything turns gray. I boiled water on my stove for a cup of soup and ate it slowly, sitting inside my tent with my back against the wall, watching my breath cloud the air. It was quiet enough that I could hear the snowflakes hitting the tent fabric. That night, the temperature dropped hard. I woke up several times to adjust the zipper of my sleeping bag, but each time, I could hear something faint outside. Not a clear sound, more like a deep crunch somewhere in the snow, as if someone was stepping carefully. I kept telling myself it was just branches cracking from the cold, or maybe a deer moving through the trees. I tried to ignore it, but it happened again around 2 or 3 a.m. A slow, deliberate crunch, then silence, then another one closer. I held my breath for a while, trying to listen, but after a few minutes, it stopped completely. I convinced myself it was probably nothing and forced myself to sleep again. In the morning, everything was bright. The sky was clear and painfully blue, and sunlight bounced off the snow so harshly it hurt my eyes. I stepped outside and noticed footprints in the snow near my tent. Not mine. They weren't from boots, though. They were uneven, wide prints, maybe from someone wearing snowshoes, or maybe just large winter boots with heavy treads. They circled around the tent once and then went off toward the trees. My first thought was that maybe a ranger had come by during the night to check the area, but there hadn't been any cars at the trailhead when I parked. The tracks looked fresh, too. No snow had covered them yet. I tried to shake it off. I boiled some more water for oatmeal and ate it standing up, staring at the prints. By noon, I decided to do a short hike farther up the ridge to look for firewood and get my bearings. I marked my path with sticks and bright tape tied to branches, so I could find my way back. The woods were quiet, almost too quiet. No birds, no movement, just the sound of my own breathing. After about an hour of walking, I realized I hadn't seen any other tracks besides my own. No animals, nothing. By late afternoon, clouds started to roll in, and the wind picked up fast. I turned back before it got dark. The snow had started falling again, light at first, then heavier as I moved downhill. The wind was blowing straight into my face, and visibility dropped. I could barely see my markers, and when I finally reached my tent, I noticed something that froze me in place. My tent flap was open. Just slightly, but open. I knew for a fact I had zipped it shut before leaving. I looked around, no one. The prints from the morning were mostly covered, but a few newer ones were pressed into the snow near the entrance. I stood there for almost a full minute, breathing hard, staring at the opening, trying to decide if I should look inside. I finally pulled the flap wide and shined my headlamp in. Everything was still there. My sleeping bag, my stove, my food bag, all untouched. Nothing stolen, nothing moved noticeably, but it was hard to tell in the dim light. I zipped it shut again, double-checking the zippers. My hands were shaking from the cold and maybe from nerves. That night, I didn't sleep much. The wind kept slapping the sides of the tent, and I could hear tree branches creaking and snapping in the distance. Around 1 a.m., I heard it again, the same slow crunching in the snow, moving around the tent. I stayed completely still, heart pounding, listening. The steps moved from one side to the other, pausing for a long time, then moving again. I grabbed my knife. Not that it would do much in the freezing dark, and waited. After a few minutes, I heard a soft, almost muffled sound, like fabric brushing against fabric. Then nothing. The silence stretched so long that I started to think maybe I had imagined it. I stayed awake until dawn. When morning came, I stepped outside immediately. The snow had stopped falling, and the world looked clean again. But there were tracks everywhere, circling my tent twice this time, crossing over themselves, stopping right by where my head had been when I was sleeping. They weren't animal tracks. They were boots, human ones, spaced close together like whoever it was had been standing there for a while. I followed the trail for about 50 feet until it veered off into the woods. Then suddenly it just stopped. No more prints, just untouched snow ahead. That was enough for me. I packed everything as fast as I could, shoving gear into my backpack without caring about the order. My hands kept slipping on the icy straps, and I could barely feel my fingers by the time I got the tent down. I kept glancing over my shoulder every few seconds, half expecting to see someone standing there, but there was nothing, just white and gray and the sound of wind. The hike back to the car felt endless. I kept following my GPS and my own tracks until I finally saw the outline of my Jeep through the trees. The relief that hit me then was almost dizzying. But when I got closer, my stomach dropped. There were footprints around the Jeep, the same ones. Whoever had been near my tent had been here too. The driver's side door handle was frozen but had smudges on it, like someone had tried to open it. I got inside, locked the doors, started the engine, and sat there for a long time, just breathing and waiting for the heat to come through the vents. I looked around at the trees one last time. Nothing moved, just still white silence. Then I drove away without stopping until I reached the main road. I never figured out who was out there that night. There weren't any cabins nearby, no other cars, and the nearest town was 15 miles away. Maybe it was a hunter passing through. Maybe someone living off-grid, or maybe just someone curious who saw my campfire from a distance. But the thing that still sticks with me even now is how quiet they were, how close they got without making a sound, and how, when I looked back through the rearview mirror that last time before turning onto the highway, I thought I saw a faint figure standing by the tree line, half covered in snow, watching my taillights fade into the distance. I never went winter camping alone again. It was the winter of 2019 when I decided to go camping alone for a few days. I was 26 then, living in Seattle, and I'd been working nonstop at a tech job that had me staring at screens 14 hours a day. I wanted to disconnect from everything, no phone, no internet, no people. Just silence, cold air, and time to think. I had done solo camping before, but never in the middle of winter. It felt like a challenge I needed, a test of how much solitude I could really handle. I picked a place called Twin Pines Forest, about 3 hours east of the city. It was remote enough that cell signals dropped completely a few miles before the last gas station. The man at the counter had warned me about the snow picking up that week, but I had come prepared: thick sleeping bag, snow boots, waterproof tent, thermal layers, emergency rations, and a small stove. I thought I had everything covered. By the time I reached the dirt road that led into the forest, the sky had already turned a deep gray, the kind of color that comes right before snow. The trees were tall and heavy with frost, bending slightly under their own weight. I parked the car near a frozen stream and hiked about a mile deeper in, where I found a flat spot surrounded by pine trees. I set up my tent there, built a small fire, and felt the first snowflakes start to drift down. The first night was calm. The cold was sharp but bearable. I sat by the fire for hours, listening to the crackling wood and the sound of the wind moving through the trees. Felt peaceful, even cleansing. I ate instant noodles from a tin bowl, watched the steam rise, and then crawled into my sleeping bag when the fire burned out. The quietness was almost too much at first. It was like the world had been turned off completely, but I eventually fell asleep. The next morning, I woke up to about 3 inches of snow. My boots were half buried, and the trees looked like white pillars stretching endlessly upward. It was beautiful in a way that didn't feel real. I boiled some water for coffee, ate an energy bar, and decided to explore the area a bit. I marked my path with small orange ribbons tied to branches so I wouldn't lose my way back. The snow was fresh and untouched except for my footprints, and I remember thinking how strange it was that no animal tracks were visible, not even birds. After about an hour of walking, I found an old wooden structure, maybe a hunter's cabin. It looked like it hadn't been used in years. The door was hanging off one hinge, and the roof sagged under a thick layer of snow. I didn't go inside, but I peeked through the window and saw an old cot and a rusted lantern. For some reason, the sight of it made me uneasy. It wasn't fear exactly, just that strange instinct that tells you to turn around and leave. So I did. By the time I returned to my camp, the sky was darker again. I hadn't realized how quickly the light faded in winter forests. I added more wood to the fire, cooked another simple meal, and sat there for a long time watching the snow fall. The silence that had felt peaceful the night before now started to feel heavy, almost too still. I thought maybe I was just tired, so I turned in early. Sometime in the night, I woke up suddenly. I didn't know why at first. The tent was dark, but there was a faint sound outside, like crunching snow. It wasn't close, maybe 30 or 40 feet away, but it was distinct. Slow, steady steps. Then they stopped. I lay completely still, trying to listen past the sound of my own breathing. After maybe a minute, the noise started again, this time circling a little farther out. My first thought was an animal, maybe a deer or elk, but the sound wasn't erratic. It had a rhythm, almost deliberate. I wanted to unzip the tent and look, but the idea of opening it to the freezing air and whatever was out there made me stay still. After a while, the noise stopped altogether. I don't know how long I stayed awake listening, but eventually exhaustion won, and I fell asleep again. The next morning, I stepped out into the cold, the snow now knee-deep. Everything looked normal except for the footprints. They weren't mine. They were large, boot-shaped prints, leading from the edge of the trees straight toward my tent and stopping about 10 feet away. They circled the campsite once and then disappeared back into the woods. I stood there for a long time, staring at them. I tried to tell myself it could have been a hiker or maybe a hunter, but I hadn't seen a single person since arriving. The area was supposed to be closed off that time of year. The thought of someone walking around my tent in the middle of the night while I was sleeping made my stomach twist. I decided I'd leave the next morning. I didn't want to panic or make it seem like I was running away from nothing. So I spent that day mostly in the tent, keeping the fire close, double-checking my supplies. But as evening came again, I started hearing faint cracks from the woods, like branches snapping under weight. It would stop for a while, then start again. Always in the distance, never close enough to see. That night, I barely slept. I kept my flashlight beside me, the tent zipper half open so I could peek out. The forest looked endless in the moonlight, just a sea of white and shadows. Around 3 a.m., I saw movement between the trees. Not clear, but enough to notice, a dark figure standing still. I froze. It didn't move, didn't make a sound. After a few seconds, I blinked and it was gone. Or maybe it had just blended back into the trees. I don't know. I didn't move until sunrise. When daylight finally came, I packed everything as fast as I could. My fingers were numb, my face burned from the cold, and my heartbeat felt constant in my throat. I followed my marked trail back, the orange ribbons barely visible under the new snow. But halfway to the car, I saw something that made my chest tighten. The old cabin I'd found before, it had fresh footprints around it. Boot prints again, same size as the ones near my tent. They went up to the door and then disappeared behind the cabin. I didn't check. I just kept walking. When I reached my car, I threw everything inside and started the engine. My hands were shaking so bad it took me 2 tries to get the key in. The snow had piled high around the tires, but somehow I managed to back out and drive down the narrow trail until I hit the main road. I didn't stop once. Took me 2 hours before I got a phone signal again. I remember checking the time and realizing I hadn't eaten since the night before. My clothes smelled like smoke and cold metal. When I finally got home, I sat in the shower for almost an hour, just letting the hot water run over me. I never found out who or what was in those woods with me. Maybe it was someone living out there, maybe just another camper passing through. But the prints, the noises, the feeling of being watched, it all stayed with me. I still go camping sometimes, but never alone and never in winter. There's something about the cold silence of those forests that makes you realize how small you really are and how easily you can disappear in it. It was early January of 2019 when I decided to go winter camping alone for the first time. I was 27, working remotely, and badly needed a break from everything. I'd spent most of December sitting behind my laptop in a cramped apartment in Denver, barely seeing daylight. I wanted quiet, real quiet. No phone, no city noise, no people. I found a small camping area deep in the San Juan Mountains, about a 3-hour drive south. It wasn't a popular site that time of year, which was perfect. I packed up my old Subaru with everything I thought I'd need: tent, sleeping bag rated for sub-zero weather, food, stove, first aid kit, a small axe, and extra layers. I even bought a new pair of snow boots the week before. The forecast said lows around minus 15 degrees Celsius, but I figured I could handle that. I'd camped in colder before, though not alone. The drive up was slow. The snow got thicker past the halfway point, and the last 20 miles were rough, just narrow forest roads lined with pine trees heavy with snow. I barely saw another vehicle. When I reached the site, it was completely empty. No cars, no footprints, nothing. Just smooth, untouched snow stretching between the trees. I set up my tent near the edge of a frozen lake, maybe 50 meters from the tree line. The silence was unreal. No wind, no birds, just the faint crunch of snow under my boots. When I stopped moving, it felt like the whole world had stopped with me. By sunset, the temperature dropped fast. I got a small fire going, cooked some noodles, and sat wrapped in my jacket watching the lake darken under the fading light. I remember feeling proud, alone, isolated but calm. It was the kind of peace I'd been missing. That night, though, the silence started to feel different. Around midnight, I woke up. I couldn't tell what woke me, but I remember lying there listening. The fire outside had burned down hours ago, and the tent was freezing. I could hear the soft, muffled creaking sound the snow sometimes makes when the temperature drops suddenly. But then there was something else, like a slow, uneven crunch. Not steady footsteps, more like something pressing into the snow and pausing. I told myself it was probably just snow falling off a tree, but it didn't stop. The sound came from the direction of the lake. Crunch, pause, crunch. I tried to ignore it, but my body wouldn't relax. I reached for my flashlight and quietly unzipped the tent just enough to peek out. The beam of light reflected off the snow, but I didn't see anyone. The lake was just a white sheet stretching into the dark, and the trees beyond it were still. I listened for a few minutes. Nothing. The sound had stopped. I zipped the tent back up and told myself to sleep. The next morning, I saw it. About 10 meters from my tent, there were tracks in the snow. Not animal tracks, these were human, barefoot. The prints led from the lake toward my tent, then circled halfway around it before heading back toward the trees. The edges of the prints were clean, which meant they weren't old. I remember standing there, my breath clouding in the freezing air, trying to make sense of it. No one in their right mind would walk barefoot out there. It was easily minus 10 degrees Celsius overnight. I scanned the area, but there were no other signs. No gear, no broken branches, nothing. Just those footprints. I felt that cold, tight feeling in my chest that comes when your brain starts rejecting what it's seeing. I tried to reason it away. Maybe someone had been camping nearby and lost a boot. Maybe they were drunk, but I hadn't seen another soul for miles. Still, I stayed another night. I didn't want to pack up so soon. I told myself I was overreacting. That evening, I collected more firewood before sunset and kept the fire going later. The warmth helped a bit, and I convinced myself that whoever or whatever made those prints was gone. Around 9 p.m., the wind picked up. I remember the trees creaking and snow swirling through the firelight. I was sitting by the fire when I heard it again. Crunch, faint and deliberate, from the direction of the lake. I turned my head slowly. The snow was blowing hard, but I thought I saw a shadow move, far out on the ice. It wasn't clear, just a darker shape against the white. My chest went tight again. I stood up and grabbed my flashlight. When I aimed it toward the lake, there was nothing, just the storm picking up, flakes flying sideways. I went back inside the tent, zipped it, and stayed awake most of the night, listening. By morning, the storm had passed, but the ground looked disturbed again. New footprints, same as before, circling the tent once more. This time, there were 2 sets of them, still barefoot. The smaller set looked lighter, almost child-sized. I felt something deep in my stomach then, something that said it was time to go. I started packing up fast. My fingers were stiff from the cold, and I kept glancing up every few seconds at the tree line. The forest looked normal, quiet, but the air felt wrong, like it was pressing in on me. I didn't even bother cooking breakfast. I just threw my things into the car, tore down the tent half frozen, and left. The road back was rougher than I remembered. Snow had piled up overnight and I slid a few times. My hands were shaking on the steering wheel, not from the cold, but from how badly I wanted to get off that mountain. When I finally reached the highway, I pulled over and just sat there, breathing, trying to calm down. A week later, I couldn't stop thinking about those footprints. It didn't make sense. Bare feet, 2 sets, circling my tent. I went online and looked up reports from that area. Buried in some local forum, I found a post from 2017. A man had gone missing near the same frozen lake in midwinter. They found his car, but never his body. The search teams said there were barefoot tracks found near his campsite, leading toward the lake and then vanishing on the ice. I didn't know what to think after that. Maybe it was him, maybe someone else entirely, but I've never gone winter camping again. Every time I see snow, I remember those prints, bare feet pressing into frozen ground, circling quietly in the dark, while I slept just a few feet away, completely unaware that someone, or something real, breathing human was out there watching.